welcome. Thank you for being willing to participate in my talk today. So, when I was introduced to the idea of a TED Talk as a project, it was an exciting opportunity because it's something that I've never done before. However, it's also a little bit of a struggle because as a person who has attended a TEDx conference and followed TED quite a bit, it's hard to recreate the environment of TED and how those talks are born because a lot of the material that we see when we watch YouTube videos is really a part of something bigger, which is the discussion and the vibe that comes from the audience and the deliberate setup of the stage and some of those elements that I think are key to sort of what makes that brand unique and what makes those type of talks unique besides just the format. However, we'll do the best we can here today to make it feel as much like that as possible given my limited environment and setup and camera quality. So my talk today really is not going to be about the facts, and I'm not going to according you to death because if you're watching this, you understand the facts. You've been part of these conversations we've had about transformational leadership and sustaining change up until this point. And for me today, it's a chance to celebrate some of the things that I've taken away from the class and also hope to inspire you as a community member or a parent. So my talk today is about education, and it's not going to become the typical education rant that you probably hear in the media in terms of listening to people complain about compensation or lack of funding or the politics behind education or some of the things that we hear about in the media or some of the things that you hear teachers talk about. To me, it is about creating an innovation and a change or a reform from education from the inside out through inspiring people to care and to do more and to be better. And my talk's about how transformational leadership really fits into that and how we each have a part in inspiring people to be able to change the way that children are being taught and learning in our schools. So a little bit about the history of education. For nearly 200 years, we've had success without a lot of change up until just recently. We've come into a time of education crisis in our country. And if you've heard anything about schools, you've heard about test scores and the pressure and pushing down content. And a lot of that has come about because of some major shifts in our culture and how we do business without a major shift in how education is done. So if you think about how the digital age has changed industry in the last 15 years, it's also changed the demands on education. However, education has not risen to the level that it needs to yet in that area, and changes in focus, and that gets a little bit into how curriculum is pushed down. And then with some of this, there's this birth of a forgotten middle group as we've passed a lot of legislation to be able to address the needs of students who struggle and provide interventions for them, as well as opportunities for students who soar to make sure that our best and brightest are receiving all that they have coming. So in the middle, you have this huge forgotten group of kids that really don't have a place and they don't feel like they belong and they don't feel successful. And that's problematic for our country as it has led to what really is being talked about as the coming jobs war. So if you think about the globalization of jobs and the economy and business, there are only 1.2 billion jobs to go around. And there are 3 billion people out of 7 billion who want a good job currently. So that gives us a shortfall of 1.8 billion jobs. The question that's going to be is who gets those new jobs as they emerge, and who's going to be able to compete to be able to get those positions in the coming time. So this competition has become a global marketplace, as you've thought about in other classes, as we've discussed how the factors that have changed the landscape, and with that needs to come a way that we change education. And so if we think about education and a traditional leadership, and when I say traditional education, it's the way that we were educated. Those of you that are in the class, and most likely our instructor too, we sat in our chairs, we listened, we took notes, we took tests, we regurgitated that information. Once in a while in a math class, we might have a little project or a game we'd invent. Occasionally we'd write a story or read a novel. In science, we'd get to do an experiment. Those type of things are very traditional when we think about school, and what has allowed that to remain in the status quo, even though we've now got information at our fingertips, unlike any other generation before, is a mix of factors, really. We've had a traditional command and control leadership. A lot of principals and building leaders in education refer to teachers as my people. My people are some of the best, and my people this, and my people will. And so there's that possession that comes along with that sort of top-down approach. There's been a very hierarchy nature of how it works. Like if you become a teacher and if you do a good job, or if you maybe just escape, you can become a principal and you move up that scale. And then someday you'll either matriculate to being a superintendent or the ISD. There's sort of been a chain for those that want to go up. Another piece that's contributed to this is the union environment that has been forceful in slowing change, because many of those constituents see change as additional work. And I don't feel that's necessarily true, because once you actually make some changes for the better in terms of how students are able to learn, it actually is less work, and it's more fun. And also teachers have not been leaders of their own learning and have waited like birds to be spoon-fed professional development and canned classes, and have not really sought out on learning expeditions or journeys to see what the needs of their students were. So you have these kids with all this massive amount of information at their fingertips, and then they're going into a job marketplace that's extremely competitive, and employers today want students to be able to critically think, solve problems, be accountable, and have a full set of 21st century skills that go along with who they are, that really don't necessarily relate to content standards and some of the standardized tests that have been pushed down to kids. So the landscape of the needs of employers is changing. However, the educational model has not, which is problematic. Kids today, in a recent study in Ottawa County, Michigan, over 50% of kids who started a college program did not complete the program in the 4 years, and 48% of those kids had not completed their program in 6 years. And the numbers are even higher for kids that went into community college programs, because they're just not able to get through, and they're not finishing, and they're not seeing what they need to see on the end. So that's a problematic piece. And the other, a lot of that, when interviewed, is kids said, when I got to college, I didn't have a sense of accountability. I wasn't able to complete projects. I was not able to work in a time-bound manner to actually create things that I needed to create for my classes at that level. So to a certain extent, higher education has changed. Similar to this class, there's no final exam. There's this project that we're going through right now. So things are changing, and it's become very difficult for students to be able to compete in that changing world. Information, not so much, not a concern, because students are very good at using Google by the time they get to that stage, and they're able to find information, and the recall of basic facts is not nearly as important as it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. So out of that is born a need for students to be able to solve problems and think critically and work in teams and collaborate and use technology and understand ethical citizenship. And quite simply, education is not responding in a pace that it needs to be able to keep up with what is going to be this coming jobs war that's already here. So how does this relate to what we need to do? And that's where transformational leadership starts to become a piece. And so this is a time for a call for action. And I'm calling for a grassroots campaign to implement transformational leadership practices throughout education. And it's time for teachers and teacher leaders to accentuate that which they do well and continue to develop leaders who will embrace change over time. Part of this comes through understanding and learning, and I think that really leads to intellectual stimulation being at the forefront of what we do, so people can begin to discover. I think the fact that education is such a closed environment, very few teachers are working outside of schools of education or education programs to be able to see truly what they need to be able to provide and what skills kids need to have. For instance, most teachers have never talked to anyone at a business about, hey, what is it that you need when kids come to you either after high school or after college? So in essence, we're creating a product, and we have no idea what our customer, if you will, which is industry, actually wants or needs out of the product. So if you think about that in a traditional business model, that would be a failing model. And so that's not too much of a stretch to think that education is failing. So the intellectual stimulation of teachers needs to turn from programmed and scripted types of experiences to really being able to allow teachers a chance to be able to learn about what it is that they want to do. And I have a saying that if you want to learn the work, you have to do the work. So I think that part of intellectual stimulation is definitely reading, but also being able to get out into businesses and have time to be able to meet with people who are in a position to use the product that they're creating and develop more empathy and understanding for what's going on. I really feel that the inspirational motivation has to come from teachers who are leading the movement and people who are excited about what change can do and what types of change can occur. And so that has to be tenured with a very deliberate notion that it's not about, hey, I'm Bob Wandell and I'm a teacher leader and here's how you should become one too. It's about helping those teachers uncover through their process, through their journey, the way that they're able to understand what this means to them. And so in essence, by helping teachers become inspired and help them discover the way that works for them to be able to do some of these dynamic things and meet the needs of these kids, hopefully that motivation takes over another teacher so that they will spread that piece on. That's a little bit where the idealized influence piece comes in as well, and to be able to be a positive person who comes with energy and really can model the fact that, hey, you can change the way that you do your job without having to make it more difficult. And in fact, it becomes more easy and it's more fun because instead of being this person who has to prepare lectures and PowerPoints, you're now going to be able to learn alongside of your kids, and you're going to be designing things with them and for them and make it much more of a dynamic experience. I think with that then comes individualized consideration, where we have got to be able to provide one-on-one time with teacher leaders and teachers to be able to discuss what they think and how they think and pieces that they've uncovered to be able to form what their own path to success and to change is. Because the reality is we can't spend the next 200 years with kids sitting in rows, practicing memorization, taking tests of varying high stakes value, and then brain dumping that information and then entering into our industry without the ability to solve problems and think creatively and critically think, all of those things that we've been able to do as successful professionals. But how much easier would it be if you had some of those skills at an early age? I know it took me a very long time and some huge mistakes in my professional career to develop some of those things that I did not develop in my educational process. So when we think about this, we have to turn to actionable steps. And I think a couple of these in closing are instructional rounds where teachers are getting time to be able to see other quality teachers and learning for themselves what's going to be great and seeing in a classroom what works and developing new ideas without the thought of having to have some sort of a massive evaluation come down on them, and have it be a really proactive time of learning and sharing information with instructional coaches who are not there to give a methodology and prescribe, but rather to encourage and let teachers know this isn't an exclusive club. We want everyone to be able to learn and grow and find new ways to inspire and motivate kids so that we can reach that forgotten middle. And lastly, I think that there's a piece that's a community action piece where parents and community members and people in industry and HR departments need to be more vocal about wanting to have employees that are really ready to be competitive, that can help keep industry in the United States and abroad where we work at a high level of competition, using the people that we've raised here and coming up with excellent individuals who'll be able to continue to take this great country into the future with all of the above mentioned. So thank you. I know that I've gone a little bit longer on time. I so appreciate your willingness to listen, and I hope that you find a way to get involved to inspire and motivate and to change education in a positive way. Have a great